You're listening to the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan.
Well, hey there, folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Just Japan podcast. It has been a hot minute. This is episode 234 of the podcast. Came to you quite a while ago with episode 233, Hidden Paths, Kyoto and Spooky Japan with Philip Jackson, a fantastic episode. And I'm back with another episode. It's been a while. Now, if you're wondering, hey, Kevin, where have you been? I'll tell you where I've been. I've been busy with the Supernatural Japan podcast. It is 2025, and I've decided to go all in on the Supernatural Japan podcast this year. If you're not someone who's already subscribed and listening to it, hopefully you will be by the time you finish listening to this episode of the Just Japan podcast. So we're not long thereafter. Now, in this episode of the Just Japan podcast, I'm going to be sharing with you an interview that I did for the Supernatural Japan podcast with Canadian Kyle Brink, who is based in Hiroshima, Japan, Hiroshima Prefecture. He has been living in Japan for quite a long time and is a Hibagon researcher. Now, what is Hibagon? Hibagon is the Japanese Bigfoot. That's right, a Bigfoot researcher in Japan. We had a fantastic conversation, and that was quite a while ago in one episode of the Supernatural Japan podcast. Now, if you're not already listening to the Supernatural Japan podcast, you should be, because clearly if you're listening to this show, you have an interest in Japan. Most recently, the episode that drops Sunday, and episodes drop every Sunday, with sometimes bonus episodes dropping midweek. I did an episode on called Lost in the Snow, The Haunting of the Hakoda Mountains, and that was all about the 1902 Hakoda Mountain incident in which 199 infantry soldiers from the Japanese Imperial Army perished in the Hakoda Mountains, and it is said to this very day that their spirits still remain there. The previous week, I did an episode called Lucky Animals in Japan, all about swallows, tsubame, and owls, fukuro, and how they are lucky animals. I also, on the Supernatural Japan podcast, look at urban legends, haunted places. I've done episodes on Teki Teki, the ghost that crawls, the legend of Oiranbuchi, which is the courtesan's bridge. Did an episode all about Awashima Jinja, that's Japan's shrine for unwanted dolls, the Haunted Dolls Shrine. There's Kuchisake Onna, this Hibagon episode, episodes about yokai like Akaname. Oh, so many amazing stories, so much great folklore. I am very passionate about folklore, and of course, I like spooky things. So again, if you're not listening to the Supernatural Japan podcast, you should be. It's everywhere you can find podcasts. Amazon, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you name it, it's there. Good Pods, it's on YouTube, it's all over the place. So again, sub to that podcast. And let's get on with this interview with Kyle Brink, who is, again, a Hibagon researcher. And this appeared, of course, in episode 22 of the Supernatural Japan podcast. And now we're up to episode number 29. So we're trucking along, a lot of great content for you there. So here is my very fascinating interview with Kyle Brink, a Hibagon researcher. That's right, a Bigfoot researcher in Japan. All right, folks, we're back with another episode of the Just Japan podcast and the Supernatural Japan podcast. And in this episode, I'm very happy to be speaking for the very first time to Kyle Brink. Kyle, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Awesome. Now, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us a little bit about what first brought you to Japan. I always like to ask the Japan origin story of guests.
Sure. Well, I was an English teacher back in Canada. I worked for the government of Canada, teaching English to French Canadian bureaucrats, politicians, federal employees. Mm. And that was a good job. And then I got into a college. I taught for a college in Ontario.
Okay.
And they had a sister city program with a city over here in Japan. And needed a teacher to come over for a 2-year contract.
Okay.
So I did. I volunteered, and that was, almost 30 years ago.
Okay. Oh,
And I
fantastic.
got over here. I fell in love with the country and with one special lady in particular. And that kind of anchored me here.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And what part of Japan are you located in now?
I am in Fukuyama City,
Okay.
and that's in Hiroshima Prefecture.
Okay. So Hiroshima Prefecture. Wow. And
Yeah, roughly 50 kilometers south of Mount Hiba.
okay, which is going to lead us through now my next question. So obviously, the reason why I wanted to chat with you today is that friend of the Just Japan podcast and friend of the Supernatural Japan podcast, Phil Jackson, gave me your name a while ago and said, Kevin, this is someone you got to talk to. Because he's like, Kevin, I know the stuff you're interested in Japan, and this is someone you want to talk to. And I'd never heard of this before. I'd never heard of Hibagon before, or Mount Hiba, or Hibagon. It was the first time. So, and I'm sure probably for a lot of our listeners, this will be the first time too. So, what is Hibagon? And this is something that you're very interested in.
Okay, Hibagon translates literally to the Hiba monster. And Hiba is Mount Hiba.
Okay.
It's the 10th largest mountain in the Chugoku mountain range. That's kind of the backbone of Western Japan. And interestingly, it's recorded in the very oldest Japanese text, the Kojiki.
Okay.
The Kojiki it's part mythology and it's part a chronology of the first Japanese emperors. It begins with a creation story and the creation of the first man and woman called Izanami and Izanagi. And these are sort of deity humans.
Okay.
They're a god and goddess. And they come down to earth and they live out most of their life on Mount Hiba. Izanami, the mother goddess, dies and is actually buried on Mount Hiba. So Mount Hiba is significant for that. But 54 years ago, it made the headlines because a Bigfoot type creature just came crashing out of the woods and was sighted many, many times around Mount Hiba. So they called it the Hibagon, Hiba monster.
The Hiba monster. Wow. Now, how did you find yourself getting interested in a topic like this?
Well, I'm almost embarrassed to say, but in 2019,
Okay.
my sister came over visiting here, and we took her to this quaint little fishing village called Tomonora. And the ladies were in the souvenir shop. It was winter. They had the heat on. It was really hot. So I told them, hey, you take your time. I'm going to go outside and just look at the sea. So I did that. And while I was looking at the sea, some sea creature that shouldn't exist, it doesn't match anything known, surfaced right in front of me.
Oh, okay. Wow.
I couldn't believe it. It surfaced and went down under, but I had its bearing and its approximate speed, so I kind of followed it, and it surfaced again 100 meters away. So I was looking for this sea monster at first. I kept going back there, watching for it. I think I saw it one more time. But it's hard, it's hard to find a sea monster because they're under the water and I don't swim. So I thought, well, if I can find a sea monster without even trying to look for it, maybe I should look into this Hibagon thing.
Okay.
So I started looking and went up to Mount Hiba. And on our first trip there, we found the evidence that, yeah, Hibagon's alive and well. It's obviously reproducing. It's in good numbers, and It's real.
Wow. So I'm curious, okay, so I'll kind of step back with my own interest in topics like this. And I apologize. I'm currently choking now on a swig of Coke Zero I just had. So that was a little bit harsher than I expected. So I think as a kid growing up, in Canada, in the 80s, as I did, I definitely was attracted to books about, the things out there in the beyond. And of course, the Patterson Gimlin photo of Bigfoot or video of Bigfoot was something that kind of, really captured the imagination of people of my generation, I suppose. And even now, I'm very fascinated and I love things about the supernatural. I enjoy listening to things about cryptids. I am subscribed to the Small Town Monsters podcast and the Bigfoot and Beyond podcast. I like that one. So I'm definitely interested in the topic, which is why definitely when Phil pointed me in your direction, I'm like, ooh, I want to talk to Kyle.
Good.
So I myself have I've spent a lot of time in the woods as a kid. I grew up in rural Nova Scotia, a lot of time camping, hiking, just playing in the forest. As an adult, a lot of time hiking. I've never, aside from some surly raccoons, I've never had any kind of encounter of note in outside in the wilderness. I wish I had a cool story to share, but at this point, no. So I'm wondering, was this a kind of going back in time, even before your days in Japan? Were you interested in things like this growing up? And so you said you grew up in Thunder Bay, Ontario. That's a pretty rugged forested area of Canada. Those of us from Canada know Thunder Bay. I've never really met many people from there either. So, it's a rugged place. So were you interested in things like Bigfoot, or were you interested in being in the outdoors when you were younger?
Sure, yeah. We used to drive through Vermilion Bay once or twice a year. Vermilion Bay in northern Ontario. And they have a big statue of a Bigfoot right beside the highway. It used to terrify me and thrill me as a little kid.
Okay.
And yeah, it's well known that Bigfoot lives in northern Ontario too. There's a good documentary on YouTube. I think it's called Lake Superior Sasquatch, it might be.
Okay.
But yeah, people see them up there. So it always fascinated me. Mm-hmm. And I learned about Hibagon before I ever came to Japan.
You really did? Okay.
It was in one of the Bigfoot books from the library, I'm sure.
Okay.
But I was never motivated to really look into it until I saw the sea monster.
Okay. Wow. So I'm curious, what are the similarities between Hibagon and the North American Sasquatch, or like a Bigfoot, as we Canadians or Americans may know it as?
Yeah, well, we have a skull, we have a cadaver, or photos of one, and those came to light in 2017 on Fuji television. They were doing a documentary, like a retrospective around the Mount Hiba area. And one of the locals asked if they wanted to see photos of a dead Hibagon. He'd been keeping them in his kitchen or something. So those aired. And my best friend is a medical doctor, and he studied this thing. I asked him two questions. Number one, is this real or a fake? He looks at it. It's the exposed skull. The meat, the flesh has all been eaten away of a Hibagon. He said, well, that's absolutely real. And I know it's real because of this and this and this. And he points out medical details. So I asked him the second question, what is it? And he said, well, it's not human, but it's very close to human. The teeth are human, but enormous. I guess it's Hibagon. So I've now shown these photos to over a dozen doctors, dentists, veterinarians, and they all answer the same way. They all agree it's a real photo. And they either say they don't know what it is, or, yep, must be Hibagon.
Okay.
So it's a large, hair-covered humanoid, not human, but very close to human. And because of Occam's razor and my own rule, which is we don't multiply monsters, I just say it's the Japanese Bigfoot.
So I'm curious, you live in that area. Is this something that Japanese people know of or talk of? Is it something, obviously, and maybe it's because of the proliferation of podcasts, and there were some, obviously, in America on various networks, so there were some reality shows, kind of reality, use air quotes, reality shows, kind of, or shows following Bigfoot researchers. I'd mentioned the Bigfoot and Beyond podcast, and that one's got a kind of a well-known kind of character of characters. His name's Bobo, and he was on a TV show for quite a while. So I think there's, I don't know, maybe Bigfoot's kind of always been a bit in the zeitgeist, in Western culture, at least in North American culture. I'm wondering about Japan. Like, is obviously, if you're anywhere chatting with, an American or a Canadian, and you mention Bigfoot, they're probably going to know whether they believe it or not, or you use the term Sasquatch. They know what you're talking about, right?
Right.
They can visualize something. But how does that work in Japan, or how have you found it over the years of the last few years as you've been learning more and investigating, researching more into the topic?
Well, most people around here have heard of Hibagon. I've never met anybody who believes it's a real creature. Most people just think it's a legend, or a few people will think that it's a yokai, like a spirit. The guardian spirit of the mountain or something. I've never met anyone who would believe that it's a real flesh and blood creature.
Okay.
But I've taken a lot of doubters and scoffers. I just invite them, come with me, and I'll show you some things, and you explain them to me. And everyone that I've taken out there softens their attitude pretty fast.
Okay. Now, this is an interesting thing I want to get into a little bit more right now. For everyone listening, Kyle has a YouTube channel, which I suggest you go and subscribe to, where you do show a lot of these different things. So I'm curious for those who are listening, and for me too, what kind of evidence have you found out there on Mount Hibagon, and things that you've shown to people that has kind of changed their way of thinking? A few examples would be great.
Right. Well, on Mount Hiba itself, in the snow, we've found footprints and handprints. Now, the footprints were pretty unremarkable, but the hands. Kevin, what size shoe do you wear?
I just wear not very big, size 9.5 US.
Size 9. Okay, I wear a size 10.5.
Okay.
And if I put my hand against it, my foot is about twice as long as my hand.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is like a 27 centimeter handprint in the snow.
Okay.
Enormous. And the fingers are way longer than a human's.
Okay.
And as thick as a do you know Polish sausage?
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah. Like Polish sausage fingers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then the thumb is splayed way out on the side.
Oh, okay.
More than a human thumb is. Just incredible. I took these photos of these prints to a veterinarian, and he came back and said they're unknown simian.
Okay.
Okay. In the same area, in the same year, but in the autumn, we found buttock prints.
Okay.
Huge butt prints where somebody was sitting on a hillside, I guess, watching over the road, and shielded from the road by a tree that was busted and propped up on its stump, sort of as a blind.
Okay.
Now, this I don't want to ask you how wide your butt is, but
I have no idea how wide it is. I haven't measured it, but
okay,
I wouldn't be able to answer that any day, huh?
My butt print is 30 centimeters.
Okay.
But this thing was twice as wide as mine.
Okay.
So this is one very large individual.
Big creature.
Yeah. So prints, we find prints. All over the place, we find ripped apart trees. Trees even ripped apart. You know, disposable chopsticks. They come in two pieces joined at one end, and you rip them apart.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
In Japanese, they're called watabashi. We find these things. I call them watabashi trees because the tree is ripped open lengthwise, Kevin.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting.
Lengthwise. And you'll have half the tree still standing, but the other half, the shard that's been ripped off, it's flung far away from the source tree. Incredible things like this.
Okay.
We find there's a book by he's a friend of mine, Christopher Noel.
Okay.
He wrote a book called The Field Guide to Sasquatch Structures in North America. He's collected 50 of the most common Bigfoot Sasquatch structures. They rip out trees and make structures with them in the woods. Well, I've found most of these 50 structures right here in Hiroshima. So the Hibagon in Japan and the Sasquatch in America and Canada are displaying the same behaviors. They're building the same structures. They apparently have the same blueprints. So that to me is the strongest. You know, if I find, we don't have beavers in Japan, but if I came across a beaver dam, I would have to reevaluate and say, well, I guess we do have beavers because only a beaver would make a beaver dam.
Yeah, there's just something in their DNA, something instinctual, right? It's
that's right.
The same way when I think back to, I don't know if this is a good analogy, but maybe. But when I was a kid, I remember I used to get pet hamsters, and they always seemed we'd throw in the wood chips and like the little fluffy stuff, and they would always make the same kind of nest. That one died, you get another hamster, they make the same kind of nest, right? They would always make the same kind of nest.
Exactly. So the same behavior, the identical behavior, points to the same creature, in my opinion.
Wow.
Yeah, and they will use in America, it's always timber.
Okay.
But here they sometimes go multimedia and mix it up with timber.
Okay.
And bamboo. All
right.
Of course, they don't have bamboo in Canada, so they're not doing it there. But the same designs. It's just incredible.
Yeah, it's reminding me. I was now, for the life of me, I can't. I'm actually, as I'm talking to you, I'm kind of scrolling through my YouTube history here because I was watching a bit of a kind of a documentary the other day, and I didn't realize how much I kind of, as I was preparing for this interview or kind of getting ready to chat with you and kind of just watching different videos and things in the genre. Of course, on the Small Town Monsters YouTube channel, there's just an incredible amount of like documentaries and things made about Sasquatch and different researchers and people looking for Sasquatch. But I watched a video or part of a video the other day, and when I find it, I'll know. But I can't think of it right now. But so it was just a guy in the United States, and it was really well done video, quite nice. And he was in the forest somewhere, and where he said he was squatching, very squatchy country. It was by a guy named Mike. I want to say Mike Wanders, Bigfoot documentary, Alone Overnight. Yeah, well, it was well done, but he showed he was shows, and I don't think I've ever maybe noticed something like this before. Maybe I wasn't looking, but he was showing some trees where he was along this like a logging road, and there's just beautiful forest, quite pristine, tall timber trees, and he was showing some trees that were I don't know, not that thin. They were probably 6 inches in diameter, 8 inches in diameter, but around, I want to say about 6 feet up, 7 feet up. They were just like snapped in half.
Yes, we find that here.
Okay. And he was just saying like, oh, he was like, that looks like Bigfoot activity. And he was like, look how high that is. And there's like nothing else around it. It clearly doesn't look like there was a windstorm or a tornado or something like that. There was no widowmakers around it, trees that had fallen and hit it. He's just like, there it is standing on its own with a break that high. He's like, how the heck does that happen?
That's right. And many times the breaks are in the same direction. Earlier this year, we found 3 structures which we realized were in a line. So we thought, well, what'll happen if we just follow this line?
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, we found 3 more structures. So you can even predict it and test your hypothesis and find these things.
I'm curious. So, I mean, you've written a book on the topic, haven't you?
Yes.
So how did you go about doing research for that? I'm curious. Was it? I mean, I haven't yet had a chance to read your book. I hope to, absolutely. But I'm curious. Like, is it a mixture of you talking to different people in the community, doing kind of old fashioned research, getting in there and like in archives and learning things, and then a mixture of your own like field research?
Yeah, I've done that. I've tried to hunt down witnesses from the 70s, but I haven't found any of them alive.
Okay.
I've talked to their relatives, and I've talked to the original ape clerk, Mr. Eggy.
Okay, what do you mean by the ape clerk?
Oh, the ape clerk. Well, at the town below Mount Hiba, it used to be called Saijo Yuki.
Okay.
But it's since been merged in with Shobara City.
Okay.
So at that time, it was its own town, and it had a town hall. And people were seeing Hibagon pretty routinely, and they would call into the police or call into the town hall to let them know.
Okay.
Well, the town hall decided, by golly, we got to get an ape department and an ape clerk to take all these calls and keep a record. So they got a young guy. He was actually an accountant, but they made him ape clerk.
Okay.
And he headed up the department. Well, he's a pretty old guy now. Still very active as a tour guide and sort of a local historian.
Okay.
And he's just become kind of like a third grandpa to my family. We love him. We visit him every time we go. And he's been a great source of information. My book basically takes all of the scattered reports and information that was never compiled together and puts it all together in one book.
Okay.
It's the state of Hibagon, total Hibagon knowledge up until 2020.
Okay.
Now, it's in the 2nd edition now, but I'm actually working on a 3rd edition, which is probably going to be twice as thick.
Oh, really?
Because it's going to be all of what it is already, plus what we have learned in the last 5 years, and that's a lot.
Okay.
And that's mostly from research in libraries and in the field.
Wow. I'm looking right now on Amazon. It's Hibagon, Japanese Bigfoot by Kyle Brink. And it's even, I see it says, your best guide to the Hibagon, the Japanese Bigfoot, with 2017 cadaver photos. And
that's it.
That's the 2nd edition. So, folks, you can find that on Amazon if you are interested. Wow. So,
hey, I'll make an offer to your listeners, if I may.
Sure thing.
Because the next edition is going to be thicker, it's also going to be probably, I don't know, twice the price. But anybody who's listening, if you want to go ahead and buy the 2nd edition, whenever the third edition comes out, if you send me proof of purchase, and that could just be, send me a picture of yourself with my book held up with against your face. Mm-hmm. I'll send you the third edition free in a PDF format.
Oh, wow. Okay. Fantastic. Cool.
Yeah, you'll get a free upgrade.
So when do you think the second when do you think so now the second edition is out, when do you think the third edition will be out?
Well, I really want it to be out later this year.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, it depends. Okay, in March, mm-hmm. we have a special visitor from the United States. She is a police officer and wildlife conservation officer.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if a few months ago, last year, she wrote to me. She said, "Dear Mr. Brink, I'm reading your book for the third time, and I just want to tell you how good it is, and assure you that everything in your book is true."
Okay.
And she says she and her colleagues know that the Sasquatch is real. Many of her colleagues have seen them crossing the highway and so on. And she is a weekend Sasquatch researcher.
Okay.
She and her buddy, they go out and they find. So she shared her findings and I've shared mine with her. Well, we find identical structures. And the footprints are the same and the handprints are the same. So she's coming over here in March. Oh, wow. And we're going to spend 10 days tramping around the bush together.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
Yes. Yeah. And
so,
she has mad tracking skills.
Okay. Well, she's a conservation officer, right? So she would spend, like, her job is about being outdoors and understanding nature and how things work, right?
Yes. So I think she's really going to elevate our game here.
Nice. Well, so, there you are, you're collaborating with, or you will be, you have already begun collaborating with, you're going to have a researcher from America coming over. I'm curious, like one of the things, leading up to this, I've always have an interest in topics like this. I have the Supernatural Japan podcast. So, I've always been interested in folklore, yokai. I'm interested in, in these things. I love a good yarn, but, I'm also pretty open-minded to a lot of different things. And I enjoy reading about cryptids. And again, I'm a fan of podcasts, things like, Graveyard Tales podcast. That's another one of my favorites. Two guys from Texas who talk a lot about cryptids from time to time. But what I do gather is that there is quite a community, for example, in America and Canada, of people who are researchers, who are quite serious about this, who take it, and put a lot of effort, a lot of work into learning about the topic. So you're in Japan. Have you, I guess, two questions. Number one, have you been able to kind of reach out and connect with a lot of these people and kind of join that community? And also, are there other people in Japan who are also interested in the topic and kind of get out there to try to discover things?
Okay, easy answers. No and no.
Oh, okay.
There is no community. Nobody that I know except me and my family and a few of my friends are into this thing. So I'm trying to create a community.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I mean, coming on a podcast like this, I think hopefully will help with that too. Kind of getting the word out there and putting this topic on the radar, because I definitely have friends who are, I know will be listening to this episode who, like me, are fans of, most things Japan, and also fans of topics like this. I right offhand, I can think of 4 or 5 people I know who I message on a regular basis, who are those who, have lived in Japan, have like a Japanese spouse. Maybe they live in America now, or they live in different parts of the world. They've lived in Japan at some point, but they also will like email me and message me or text me things about stories about cryptids or stories about ghosts. And so I know that like they've got their feet in both worlds. So I'm sure they're going to be very excited to learn about this for sure.
Well, let me extend a pretty much open invitation. Anybody who's in Japan or wants to come to Japan, if you want to see the evidence for yourself, I'll take you out there, because I don't go alone.
Well, that's one thing. Like I've explained to the listeners who follow me on social media and stuff may know. Maybe I host a lot of podcasts. Sometimes I can't remember what I've said on others, but I'm currently in a situation where, like, I'm based in Malaysia at the moment, but in an ideal perfect world, I do want to return. My family and I do want to return to Japan, but work doesn't always take you where you plan to go. So later this year, maybe we will be back, or maybe we won't be for a few more years. But definitely, if I'm going to be in Japan for an amount of time, I often do come for summer holidays. I definitely want to connect with you, and it would be fantastic. I would love to go out and see some of the evidence. That would be very neat. So like you mentioned, there's a no for people doing field research in Japan aside from yourself. I don't know where. I don't know. I guess if you build a community, you get the word out. You probably, hopefully, you will get more people down your way. But like you mentioned already earlier on, local folks, Japanese folks, just how about even, like, I'm curious, people that you've brought out, have you been able to kind of change their mindset? Have they become interested in researching?
Oh yes, everybody that I take out changes their mind.
Okay.
I take out skeptics.
Mm-hmm.
And they come back after, one afternoon. They come back either completely believing or at least more open-minded.
Okay.
Because there's just no explaining. I could take you to a place on Mount Hiba, which is not only unmapped, it's falsely mapped. The terrain does not match any of the maps at all. It's a completely undiscovered area.
Okay.
Now we'll go off trail. We have to climb a hillside. It's about 50 meters high,
mm-hmm.
to a very narrow ridge, and then it's 50 meters down. And there's a river. We go across the river, and there's sort of a basin area about halfway up the mountain. Now, at the top of the ridge, there's about 7 or 8 structures. One of them is a tree which somebody has uprooted, turned upside down, and replanted in the earth.
Okay.
Can you imagine that? So its roots are reaching up to heaven.
Okay.
Now they have these especially I've seen photos of them in Alaska.
Okay.
This is something that the West Coast, and especially the northern West Coast Sasquatch, is known to do.
Mm.
And I have an example of the same thing right on Mount Hiba.
Wow.
But even more crazy than that, there's something I call maybe I shouldn't even get into the colossal solar calendar.
Okay.
It's 8 lines, 8 radiating lines.
Okay.
That they go from the bottom of Mount Hiba on the west slope,
mm-hmm.
and they radiate up in these 8 lines all the way up the mountainside.
Mm.
Can you picture that in your head?
Yeah.
It looks kind of like the rising sun, of Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can find them on Google Maps or Google Earth. They're in aerial photos. They're very clear. Just look on the west side of the mountain.
Okay.
So I asked the manager of the prefectural forest, what are these things? And he said he has no idea. And he's always wondered about it. And he said there's no way, you can't get in there. It's impossible to get in there and see. Well, it took me about 3 years, but I did get in there. and I walked those lines. I took some friends, and we walked in those lines for about 3 hours. What they are, they're lanes of cleared trees.
Okay.
Each lane is about it's about the width of a 2-car lane street.
Okay.
And the longest line is over 1 kilometer. Straight up the mountain. Line 4 points to the sunrise of the summer solstice.
Okay.
The sun comes up in the morning on the summer solstice right exactly over that line. That's why I call it the colossal solar calendar. Well, here's the crazy thing, Kevin, if that's not crazy enough. We searched these lines as hard as we could, and I told everybody, please look for saw marks. But of all those removed trees, those cleared out trees, not one was cut. They're all busted off at the stump.
Okay.
You see what I mean?
Yeah. That would be weird.
No blades,
how does
no
that happen?
saws,
Okay.
no chainsaws. They're all busted and jagged. It's the craziest thing you've ever seen.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That's something else. Do you have a video about that one on your channel?
I sure do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I walk you right through it.
Okay, cool. Because I'm looking at your channel right now. For everyone listening, Kyle has a YouTube channel called Brink Books, and on Brink Books, you've got a lot of videos about evidence you found and different things like that. So yeah. I've watched some, but there's a lot there, a lot of fantastic stuff. So I definitely would suggest to anyone out there interested in the topic to go check out Kyle's YouTube channel. I will have links in the show notes, of course. But how often do you get up to the mountain, or how often do you get out there doing your research these days?
Well, it's pretty tough because the roads are not good.
Okay.
So it takes about 3 hours to get there and into position.
Okay.
And I'm tied to my job here in Fukuyama, but we try to go twice a year.
Okay.
The mountain is it's closed off. All the roads around it are closed during the winter.
Oh, okay.
So you can't even get in from November, typically, to March, even April. But we try to get up there as soon as the roads open, because that's where you find the best evidence.
Yeah.
And we make our autumn trip as late as we possibly can.
Okay.
Yeah, because then there's not a lot of people up there, and we have the place to ourselves.
And I guess you'll be going this spring, with a researcher from the United States.
Yeah, that's right.
Neat. Wow, fascinating stuff. So I'm curious. My brain is kind of going all over the place. But I don't want to keep you too much longer. It's pretty late where you are. I do realize that. Where are the best places for people? I guess we've already mentioned a few here, for people to find out more about this topic, where you share your research, and how can people get a hold of you if they want to reach out and have a chat or just say hello to you?
Okay. Well, there's my YouTube channel that you've mentioned, Brink Books. If you just type Hibagon into YouTube, you'll find me.
Okay, yeah.
There's my book, Hibagon Japanese Bigfoot. I've got an email contact number in the book.
Okay.
I don't know. Should I give my personal email on your podcast? It's fine with me.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, go ahead. No problem. I can also add it to the show notes as well. Once you yeah.
Okay, well, you have it. You put it in the show notes.
Okay, I'll do that. So, guys, you check the show notes, and those are all the links below, like wherever you listen to a podcast, and I'll have the links to your YouTube channel and also to the book, of course.
Okay, great.
And your email address. And wow, it's really fascinating. I wonder, like, I mean, of course, a question that's popping in my mind right now. What do you think you might do if you actually ever saw something in person? Aside from I figure I'd probably, be one of those situations where I'd just stand there with my mouth agape and, I can imagine my brain is hopping now to a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 3 years ago. I was hiking on a mountain in southern China, and I'm quite an outdoorsy person. And I'd heard that in the area there were cobras, Chinese cobras, and I'm interested in all creatures, great and small. And I'm like, I want to get out there one day and get photos of some really interesting snakes and cobras. And I'm walking down this trail alone, and sure enough, what slithers in front of me? A 3 meter long black cobra, and I just stood there and froze. And there was a stone wall on one side of me that was probably about 1.5 meters high. And who knew? But that snake just shot up the wall and off it went into the bushes.
Wow.
And I mean, I had like a Nikon DSLR on my shoulder, an iPhone in my pocket. And I was just like, oh, and then off it was. And then I think, after the fact, I pulled the phone out of my pocket. I was like, oh no, I didn't even get a picture of anything, I can imagine that probably would be me if I saw something, in the woods that might resemble a Bigfoot. I would just be sitting there with my mouth on the ground, trying not to lose control of my bodily functions.
Exactly. Well, I hope to see one day. I hope to photograph it. We've smelled them.
Ah,
I've
heard they smell horrible.
No luck. Yeah, they've got serious body odor problems. We just don't know how to get close to them, but they can find us and they can creep around us, and they do.
I can imagine, actually. I live here in Malaysia, and where I live, we have a lot of monkeys. And they're big family groups, and we have this one specific type called the dusky leaf monkey or the dusky langur. They're adorable things. They're all over the place in my neighborhood. I walk to school each day. I walk to my job, and it's only about a 15-minute walk, but I'll usually see at least maybe 2 family groups each day when I'm walking. But you can smell those guys 500 meters before you see them, and they're just cute little monkeys. And, they look like teddy bears almost, but it's just like, whoa, what a stink. It smells so bad. So it's interesting when I see documentaries or videos where they talk about, you could smell Sasquatch. Now in my mind, I'm thinking I probably have a little bit of an idea on a minute. If it smells this bad when they're that small, God knows, I can't imagine. Yeah. I can't imagine what it would smell like if they're gigantic.
We were checking out an area called, in Japanese, called Castle Mountain. There's an old castle ruin on the top. I like to do metal detecting, and this is the best country in the world for it. So I said, let me just see if I can find the road up to the castle. You, wife and daughters, stay here, stay together, stay by the car. I'll be right back. So I go up about 100 meters. I find the road, and it's got a bunch of trees pushed down over the road in parallel across the road. One of the Sasquatch structures called roadblocks.
Okay.
Basically, it's no trespassing sign, I think.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, well, this is definitely the road, and I don't seem to be welcome, so I think I'll go down and rejoin my family. So I go down, and my younger daughter and wife, they're on one side of the car, and my elder daughter is around on the other side of the car. And she sees me coming, and she said, "Daddy, what is that stink?" Now, my wife and girl on the other side of the car have no idea what she's talking about. They don't smell anything.
Okay.
And I don't smell anything. But as I get closer to my elder daughter, I walk into this wall of funky stink. Just like walking through a curtain of stink. And my daughter and I both agreed it was like the worst BO you've ever smelled.
Okay.
Plus, specifically fermented feces, fermented sewage.
Yeah, that's so appealing. But I know that the monkeys here, there's that smell of like definitely a smell of feces, like of old feces, and then it's kind of like musty and musky as well.
Musky, yeah.
Like a musky fecal, kind of like walking by a zoo enclosure and one of those like years ago, I remember going to the Himeji Zoo, and it was a really, like 15, 20 years ago, it was a really ghetto zoo, and the animals were really kind of the rough enclosures that weren't maintained very well. And it reminded me of like a poorly kept zoo enclosure. And that's what I smell when I'm walking around, like here where I live, when there's like a family of monkeys around. Because there'll be 20 or 30 of them in a troop. And you're just like, ugh. And then, but those guys they don't hide. They just sit there and stare at you, and you're like, "Oh, you guys are so cute. Why do you smell that way?" But I can only imagine again what a 7-foot version of them or an 8-foot version of them would smell like. It would be absolutely rancid. Wow. Wow. Interesting. Wow. So Kyle, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Hey, no, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating topic. And for you guys out there listening, I'm sure you're going to agree that's definitely an interesting side of Japan, an interesting take of Japan that a lot of us probably don't think about. And I often wonder, there was a fantastic Fukuoka, or actually Kyushu-based content creator for a while called Japan Trail Cam. He used to have a great Twitter X feed, but he's since closed his account, and he would set up trail cameras. He set them up all over the place in Kyushu, and he'd set up, I think he had like 30 or 40 trail cams, and he'd just set them up in the woods and just leave them for weeks and come and collect them. And he'd put all this footage. He had a YouTube channel too, which I believe Japan Trail Cam might still be out there. But I think at one point I interviewed him for a podcast, and we were talking about all the cool things he had hoped to find. And I don't think he ever came across a Hibagon, but that would have been cool.
Well, I'm hoping to get one day.
Yeah, nice. I hope you do too. We'd love to see that. Well, Kyle, thanks so much. I don't want to keep you any longer. It is Friday night. And for all of you guys out listening, please check the show notes below, and also on the Just Japan podcast and Supernatural Japan podcast Facebook pages, and on my social media. I will share your links out. I will add them to the Facebook pages and stuff. And for you guys, check out Kyle's book, check it out his YouTube channel. And if you find the topic interesting, go shoot him an email. Thanks a lot, Kyle.
Yeah, and I'll take you out there.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kevin.
I want to thank Kyle for taking his time to be interviewed by me, originally for the Supernatural Japan podcast, for your listening pleasure here on the Just Japan podcast. Fascinating story, a fascinating man. You can, of course, find his book all about Hibagon on Amazon. Go check it out. The links will be in the show note for that. And and he's definitely going to be on an upcoming episode of the Supernatural Japan podcast when he's got some updates later on this year. So that's a place to go to hang out there and find out more. So the link again to his book will be in the show notes below. Also, other links will be there for the Supernatural Japan podcast. There's so much great content over there in that feed for you to come on over and listen. I would love you guys, my awesome Just Japan listeners, to come on over and listen. I know a lot of you haven't subbed already, and I hope you do. Again, anywhere you listen to podcasts, come and follow the Supernatural Japan podcast. I'm all in 2025, guys. All in. There's going to be so many great episodes coming, guests coming, some great guests who are connected to spooky things and exploration things, around the world, really. So there we go, folks. Just in case you're wondering, I am doing well. I'm happy and healthy, as are my family. Still in Penang, Malaysia, but we are leaving in a few months, leaving Malaysia, moving away. That's right, to a place with a lot of incredible history called Xi'an, China. And on my YouTube channel, on the Busan Kevin channel, I made a video called We're Leaving Malaysia, where I talk all about that, everything behind that move. I'll put a link in the show notes to that as well. So going to spend the summer in Japan, hanging out in Osaka, where my family is, And then we'll be moving back to China for the third time to a city with a lot of amazing history, incredible history, the terminus of the Silk Road, the home of the Terracotta Army, and all of that good stuff, with frequent trips to Japan, of course. All right, guys. So that is it for episode 234 of the Just Japan podcast. And I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for helping the show grow. Please, of course, leave a review and a rating. Good ones only, of course. And tell someone you know about the podcast. And that's it. Talk to you later, folks.
If you got a minute to spare, don't go anywhere. Stay right there, 'cause Kevin is about to speak.